Hey there, FlossTube. This is Cathy, the hands-on designer, and I am here today to bring you the finishing tutorial for the Four Seasons Folk series. Here I am showing you Spring Folk, which at the time I'm filming, this is the only one of the series of four that is available. It came out at the recent Nashville Needlework Market. In fact, actually, we're getting ready to release Summer Folk here in just a few weeks. I know I've seen a lot of you finishing all of your band stitches out there. Thank you for posting those and being part of the stitch along that's been going on with this series. So I think many of you are ready for a finishing tutorial. So you'll need your board from Chantel's 141. She is going to do a tutorial to show how she stained the board because it does come unfinished. But it does have that beautiful etched quilt pattern in it. And all of the four designs in the series will be stitched in DMC. So an entirely new color palette is coming out with Summer Folk. And with the exception of the DMC, the Pearl Cotton number 12 that I used for the specialty stitches, it is the same color for all four seasons. So if you bought a ball of the Pearl Cotton, that is enough for all four designs in the series. And it'll be 3 new sets of specialty stitches in each of the 4 seasons. I also used, the fabric will be the same for all 4 seasons. It is 32 count driftwood fabrics by Stephanie. She does dye that also in 16 count Aida, and the design is Aida friendly, right down to the specialty stitches. I also used Lady Dot Creates a Rick Rack on spring. It was Grace Green. And I will have all of that information on the back of each chart that I do in the series. If you always take one of my charts, flip it to the back, you're always going to see the linen that I used on the cover model. Also the stitch count, the DMC and or whatever thread numbers, whatever threads I chose, and then any finishing accessories. So that's where, of course, I have paddle listed from Chantel and the Lady Dot Creates Rick Rack, as well as the cotton fabric that I chose for my background. I will list that below here in the video as well in the comment section. So if you don't have your pattern yet, you can check it out there. I believe I did also list that on the website too. I try and make that convenient for you. This is going to be one of those videos where I'm going to talk you through the pictures. So it makes it convenient for you. You've let me know that you do like those kinds of videos where you can look at the picture, listen to the step, then complete that step, pause the video, complete that step, and then get ready to move on to the next step. Now, there's nothing in this tutorial that I haven't probably covered in other tutorials, but I just thought it would be nice to bring everything together in one video for this particular series. You'll finish all 4 seasons the same way on the same board because we use lovely magnets for it. And I just think it makes it very convenient and a fun way to decorate your home. So let's get on with the finishing tutorial at this point. We're going to start with a list of items that you might need. And let's get ready to get finishing. Welcome to the Four Seasons Folk finishing tutorial. I'm Cathy with Hands-On Design. This will be the tutorial, the finish that we use for all 4 seasons in the Four Seasons Folk series. The first design available is Spring Folk, as pictured here. I do also have other tutorials to show the specialty stitches. So far, I have, as of this recording, I have a tutorial number 92 to show the specialty stitches for both linen and Aida for Spring Folk. I will have additional tutorials as the subsequent seasons come out. Let's get started. We're going to start with the stitched portion of the finish. So here we'll grab our completed stitching, and you're getting a sneak peek ahead to what Autumn Folk looks like. It's a piece that I taught previously at a class and then made into the series. I also have some mat board, and you'll see there's double-sided tape on it. We'll talk about that more. Also some batting. I like to use the thin natural, warm and natural batting. I also have my quilting ruler, my rotary blade, scissors, and I have some lacing thread. This is a heavyweight upholstery type thread. You can purchase at most big box craft stores. I do also have a sharp needle. That will be helpful, an embroidery needle that will be helpful when we go to do the lacing. You'll also need a few other finishing supplies, pretty much everything that you have in your stash. If you've done any type of finishing with me, just your typical finishing supplies. So the first thing we're going to do is work to cut our mat board. There's a mat board base underneath the linen. Now in cutting it, in the class, I actually gave them pre-cut sizes, but what you'll want to do is you'll measure first your finished piece, your finished stitching, and then I like a 1/4 inch border around the stitching. So in this case, my board will be cut 12 inches by 3.5 inches. That would probably be the same size that you would use if you did the 32 count fabric, that's the driftwood Fabrics by Stephanie, or the 16 count. If you used something different, I would definitely make sure that you measure your piece. I would actually probably even suggest you measure your piece if you used what I used. It's hand-dyed linen. It all dyes differently as it also dries differently, and your measurements may be slightly different. I also probably rounded to make sort of even numbers, you know, in case maybe it was 11 7/8, something like that. I just made it easier on myself and called it 12. And again, you'll want to measure the stitched area, the stitched image, and then add 1/2 inch to either measurement. So then that gives you the 1/4 inch all the way around. And as I said, in this case, my board, my mat board, was cut 12 inches long by 3.5 inches wide. When I like to lace my linen onto a mat board, I do like to usually have several layers of batting between the mat board and my linen. So that's what you're seeing here in this picture. What I like to do is put a piece of double-sided tape. In this case, I use an acid-free stitchery tape. I put several pieces onto the mat board, and here I'm peeling the paper backing off, and I will lay that, I'll turn it over and lay it into those 2 layers of batting that are on my work surface. There is no need to put any stitchery tape between your layers of batting. Those will kind of cling together and won't move. But this kind of gives you a gentle, a helping hand, so to speak, as we're moving our linen around, and won't shift your batting on the mat board. So next step is we'll trim the batting with our rotary cutter or scissors. Just make sure that you use a nice sharp scissors. I always suggest when you're trimming batting from your mat board or next to your mat board, and this goes for any type of finish that we're lacing, it's an ornament, or in this case, you know, the band sampler, I want you to leave a scant bit of the batting showing beyond the edge of the mat board. This just helps to give you a nice clean edge as you lace it. And this is a closer look at what I call a scant bit of the batting showing. It's probably about a 1/16 of an inch. Next thing we're going to do is center our stitching on the batting covered mat board. Now I'm holding it up to the light, and in this case I'm really just making sure that I am mostly centered. I'm eyeballing it. I'm not counting threads at this point or anything. Just want to make sure that you're basically centered side to side and top and bottom. We will have opportunity as we go to continue to make sure that it is well centered. Now what I'll do is I will take that whole combo that I was holding and place it stitching side down onto my work surface. And you know, if you feel like your batting and mat board shifted quite a bit, double check before you place it down, because we are going to be trimming away some of the linen. And you can see I've placed my ruler on here at the 1 1/4 inch mark, and I'm going to trim away that excess linen. This is probably about average for something this size of the amount of linen that I like to leave. And again, you can use your rotary cutter, or you can mark it with a pencil and or a friction pen and cut it with the scissors. All right, this is what it should look like after I have trimmed all 4 sides. And you'll notice that I placed it lengthwise, the long edge parallel to me, because this is how I will get started with my lacing. I just wanted to give you an idea of what it should look like once we've got all 4 sides trimmed. All right, now we're going to get ready for lacing. And you can see when I lace, I will be, in essence, folding the linen over the back of the mat board, creating a selvage. I'm a righty, so I'll start on the right-hand side and lace left. So if you're a lefty, you'll want to probably do the opposite. And for anything that I'm lacing, I pretty much always lace my needlework. Whether it's a long rectangular shape like this, or even if I've got a rounded section, I always like to start lacing on the longest straight edge that I have. In this case, it would be my 2, it's pretty obvious, it'd be my 2 long sides. So that's why I placed my, in the previous photo I showed you, I placed my pieces that way. And again, we will have an opportunity to double check the centering of our stitching. Don't worry, it might have shifted a little bit. If you feel like it shifted a lot, double check before you actually begin lacing. All right, what you'll want to do is take that embroidery needle or that sewing needle, make sure it's got a sharp tip. The reason why I say sharp tip, it just helps go through whatever fabrics you're using, the linen or anything. I just feel like a sharp tip is always better when we're doing lacing. And then it usually has a pretty big eye, and that upholstery thread, it's a nylon thread, so it has a little bit of a coating on it, so sometimes it can be hard to go through a smaller eye. So make sure you've got a nice decent size eye. Also, cut a very long thread, and just when you think it's long enough, maybe even go a little bit longer. I like to lace with a very long thread, and I really emphasize that in a lot of my classes. It does give you a little bit of an arm workout in the beginning, and if you go too fast, yes, your thread can knot up, but take your time. What I like to do is to be able to get through most of the lacing journey without having to start and stop, because that creates, well, you have to knot, and that creates points where it could be a little bit weaker, or I really just I just find it way more convenient to have one really long thread. I always tell people I'm kind of lazy that way. I don't like to have to start and stop. Now, in this photo, what you'll notice is that I am taking my needle in and out of the same side of linen. The needle's running parallel to the edge of the fold and the cut side. I call this a scooping stitch, and we're going to use this stitch for all of our lacing. What I feel like that does is that sort of distributes the tension that we're going to be putting on the linen as we lace, and it helps to keep from pulls in your linen running through to the front side, and we certainly don't want that. So to start, you can see I'm fairly close to the edge, the short edge of my mat board, and I've run my needle in and out parallel to the edge about midway point of the selvage. That's where you're going to take your first scooping stitch and pull your needle all the way through. Once we've completed that first stitch, I'm going to take a second stitch a few threads away from where the first stitch was. Reason why I do this is because we're going to be putting a lot, this is our first spot where we pull, and we're going to be putting a lot of tension on that first knot. And I probably didn't say back a step ago, when you cut that really long thread of lacing thread, we put it through the needle, and then you also put a big knot on the other end. So what this does, it just kind of gives you a little bit of an extra security for making sure that knot doesn't pull through your linen as you pull it. If it does pull through, well, then you know your knot's not big enough. All right, once you've made that, secured that initial knot and made that secondary stitch, you are ready to start lacing. Your needle will travel from side to side in that parallel motion, usually keeping it about the middle of the selvage on either side. Now, I call this a ladder stitch motion as I scoop back and forth. Now I want you to look at this picture because there's a couple things going on here. I am keeping tension on my thread with that's my left hand, with my thumb and my index finger. I'm holding onto that thread really tightly. I'm also using my other fingers to help hold the mat linen combo onto my work surface and help keep the selvage turned over. So there's a lot going on here, and it does take practice to kind of get the coordination of this down, but you know, practice makes perfect. And I find that it's really helpful. I'm using the work surface almost as an additional tool to kind of help keep everything in place. I really do like keeping the thread taut as I go, so I don't have to go back and tighten my threads. I just feel like I get the best look on the front this way. So we're just going to continue to scoop back and forth. I keep my stitches, my scooping stitches, about the same width and about the same, the stitch itself the same width. This is probably about 3/8 of an inch to 1/2 inch, and about 1/2 inch apart. I'm going to continue lacing or scooping all the way across that long edge first, and here you can see what my back looks like as I've worked all the way across. So here you can really see the scoops that I've made are generally about the same length, and the stitches are also separated by the same amount. It's nice and even as you work your way across. And you can see, yes, you can see pulls in the linen. That means I've pulled it nice and tight. But if we looked at the front, the lines, the tension on those stitches would not show through to the front. Now, at this point, I'm going to want to turn it over to make sure that I'm still centered, but I don't want to let go of my stitches and let all the tension go. So I'm going to make a knot. I call this a safety knot. It's so that I can sort of let my needle and thread dangle and not have to worry about my tension coming out. So I run my needle through the linen, pull the thread until it creates a loop, and here you can see I'm running my needle through the loop, and then I'm going to tighten that all up. Now what I can do is I can turn it over and make sure that I am centered. And I kept this picture in because I want to be honest with you, I don't think my piece is very centered. I've got a little more room showing on the right side than I do the left. So here's what we want to do. And actually I've got a few little kind of, I don't know, it's creases, that type of thing along the edge. So I usually combat those first. So what I'll do is I'll grab the top and the bottom selvage in two hands, and I'll just kind of tug on them, just gently but firmly. And that kind of helps smooth out a lot of those creases. The rest will be taken care of when we lace the opposite direction. Then I actually, and make sure you have clean hands, shift the linen around between my thumb and my index finger until I am happy that it is centered on the piece. Also, make sure that what this photo shows you is make sure that you are centered on the top and the bottom as well. What you'll kind of want to do is pretend, fold the selvage over to pretend that it's laced on either end, and make sure that you've got an equal amount on the top and the bottom. And if you don't, pull on the linen, shift it till it's in place. Right, now we're ready to go ahead and lace our short ends. So here's a good example of what you can see, how I anchored, or I called it a safety knot, how I anchored my lacing, my first round of lacing at the end, and I put a nice good knot in there. Now, what this picture shows you is that I have pulled tight enough so that it naturally kind of pulls my linen in on the ends. And that's what we want, because when I fold that edge over, I don't want my linen to sort of peek out the side or the edges of the mat board at all. So here you can see I have folded it over, and that's what it would look like. Now this is going to be a little different. These next couple steps are going to be a little different than how I traditionally lace, like say an ornament or something smaller, something that's not quite so long and narrow, and I'll kind of explain that as I go. Constantly asked, how do you get nice crisp corners? And this is how. So at this point, I do want to make note too, I have not trimmed my lacing thread. That's why, again, I like that really nice long strand. So I started actually on the side that I ended up knotting, and I pulled that over, and I go straight out to the corner first. I'm going to take some tacking stitches. My needle is going through the selvage that's already been laced through to the corner. You can kind of see I'm almost right at the corner, not right at the corner because I don't want that stitch to show on the front, but enough, close enough that the stitch won't show, but as I pull, it'll give me a nice crisp corner. So I'm going to put my needle through like that, and then I'm going to pull the needle and thread all the way through. I call it like a tacking stitch. I'm going to do this two more times. That's generally about 3 is what I do in my corner. See, I've done my first one in the corner. Now I'm going to do one midway on the folded edge there. And again, you see I take my needle through the previous selvage, through close to the fold, and then there's my final one. So if you look at that corner where the fabric folds over, you can see kind of my 3 tacking stitches there. But now I am ready to lace this down. So in a typical lacing situation, like a square or a smaller rectangle, what I would actually probably do then is travel to the opposite corner on the opposite end of the piece and do those same tacking stitches in the center, and then lace back and forth, working my way across and end with the same set of tacking stitch on either end. But in this case, if I pull, because this is so long and narrow, I'm afraid I'll actually kind of pull too hard and warp my board or bend my board, and we don't want to do that. So I'm making a little adjustment here. And that's actually really why I wanted to do this tutorial, because I have a few other tutorials on lacing, but this one's a little different situation. So I'm really kind of treating it in the same way. I'm just using bits of the back where we've previously laced in a different way. So you can see I've taken my first scooping stitch into the selvage. I'm ready to move on to the end fold. So I've taken a little scoop through the selvage, and I pull there, and now I go up to the folded, the short end folded selvage, and I'm doing another scooping stitch. And I'm basically going to do that little stitch through the selvage until, well, basically I run out of selvage. So here you can see I was able to do 2 scoop stitches through the selvage to kind of pull down and pull that short end in, that short fold. Now I have to work my way across to the opposite side. So how am I going to get there? I've got to almost kind of create a bridge, I guess is the easiest way to say it. So I'm actually going to use some of my previous lacing. If you look at this picture very carefully, you'll notice that my needle actually runs under a few of the previously laced stitches from the long side. That's going to serve as my anchor to help get me, lace my way across. All right, and this is actually what it looks like completed. So what you'll see is that I actually went through my lacings 2 times, the previous lacings, and then anchored into the short end twice to get my way, to travel my way across to the other side, where I picked up the selvage again and did 2 more times, and then and completed pulling that end over. We're not quite done yet, but this just kind of shows you what the back is going to look like. A word of caution though, what I want to make sure that you do when you use these previous pulled threads you're using them kind of like, as I said, sort of an anchor to get across. I chose to use 2 different sets. You'll see one of my stitches is shorter than the other. I didn't stretch or pull on the same set of stitches because I don't want to pull that one set too much. This is actually a good opportunity if you feel like you have some threads that have come kind of loose to sort of snug those up a bit. I wouldn't suggest doing any more than 2 on this width, and I think that'll hold your end quite nicely. Okay, so we are at the opposite corner, and again we want to get a nice corner here. So I'm going to do the exact same thing. I've laced all the way across and through the selvage, and then I'm actually going to carry my needle and thread straight out to the corner. Whenever I do this, I always start at the corner first, because I don't want to start at the bottom and then have any of the layers shift up, and then I get kind of a funky looking corner. So I start at the corner, I do exactly what I did on that first side. I go through the previously laced selvage and come out very close to that corner. And then as you can see in here in this photo, I did 2 more tacking stitches for a total of 3, and I am ready to finally now end my thread. What I do is I take that sharp needle and I go through some of the layers, pull again, like we did before, pull to make a knot, pull the thread down till it creates a loop, then put your needle through the loop and pull. I am going to do this several times because I like to make sure that I have good knots, and then always whenever I'm lacing anything, or even if I'm closing up a pillow or something like that, I will always run my needle back through the layers and then trim wherever my needle comes out. I don't ever trim right next to where I made the knot. I like to have just a little more, there's a lot of tension that gets put on that knot, so we don't want to trim too close to it and then have that be something that comes out. And there's what you look like from the front. Now, I will say, I'd probably, as I was looking at this picture, I would probably give myself about, I don't know, maybe a B+ at this point, or maybe an A-. I feel like I could probably center a little bit better. So here's the good news. I always tell people, once we start lacing in the opposite direction, you lock your piece into place. Now, because this is sort of long and narrow, you actually do have a little more play. So I could use, again, make sure your hands are clean because we don't want to get our needlework dirty, but you could actually still kind of play with, there's a little bit of play left in there. Shift your linen a little bit to get it perfectly centered on there. I'm looking at that, it's probably just a couple threads. That's actually why I left this picture in there. I like to, so that I can explain this to you. Now, if this was going in, say, a frame, we have that rabbit on the frame that I could use that to sort of make sure that it's nice and centered. But since this is going to lay on top of a piece of fabric covered mat board, we need to make sure that this is good and centered. And before I forget, because in the previous step, I talked to you about how to lace the short end. Don't forget to go back and lace the other short end, and you'll do that in the same manner. All right, now we are ready to cover our fabric and get our final steps ready to go ahead and finish the piece. So for this, you're going to want another piece of mat board. Now here, I made my mat board about a 1/2 inch larger all around. So that initial mat board, I believe I said I cut 12 by 3.5. So in this case, this board is cut 13 by 4.5. Gets an inch larger because that gives me a 1/2 inch on all 4 sides. And then I found a really pretty quilting cotton, and I got some rickrack and some other trims and things like that. Now with this one, I chose not to do any batting between my mat board and my quilting cotton. There are times when I do. It's just a personal decision for this one. I didn't really feel like it needed it for this one. I always tell people, have fun when you're searching for quilting cottons to finish your pieces. If you're kind of new to this, I would maybe avoid some obvious diagonals or patterns or directional prints, that type of thing, because you're really going to be covering up a lot of it. So you're not going to see a lot of that pattern. So I find smaller scatter prints that just have a lot of the fun color that picks up the color and enhances the piece that you stitched, I think is kind of the name of the game. All right, so we are ready to cover our mat board. So I have cut that the correct size, in which case this would be 13 by 4.5. And I've cut my quilting cotton, it probably looks like it's about an inch or so larger than my, there's about a 1 inch margin on all 4 sides. And I did press it. And I think that's important because you're going to be pulling on it and making sure it's nice and flat. But if there's any like folding wrinkles or fold lines or anything, you want to make sure you get that out. It's right side down on your work surface. And then I centered the mat board, and you can see on the 2 long edges, I have 2 pieces of double-sided tape. Now that tape is fairly close to the edge, which is how I like to position it. And I do tend to like to start with the long edges first, much like when I lace. I just feel like I can get a little better control this way. Here's a close-up of exactly how close that double-sided tape is to the edge. You're probably talking about, oh, somewhere between a 1/16 and an 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. And that works just fine. So now I am ready to pull the backing paper off my double-sided tape. I work with one side at a time, so I'm really only going to take off the paper on one side. And I do find, you want to make sure, people sometimes have a love-hate relationship with this tape. You want to make sure it's adhered very well. Sometimes it's helpful to have like a little X-Acto blade or something like that on hand to kind of help you pick up the corner so that you can get peeling it. All right, once you've taken all that backing paper off, go ahead and fold the fabric up into the adhesive. This, if you are using something that's got, say, lines in it, that type of thing, this is where you really would want to pay attention to how you're attaching it. You want to make sure you're lined up well. Okay, so once I have secured that first side, I always like to work to the side closest to me. I like to fold the fabric up into the adhesive as opposed to down into the adhesive. That's just a personal preference. If you're able to kind of work that both directions that way, that's great. But as you can see here, I've turned my my covered edge up to the top, and the side I want to work with now closest to me, and I have pulled back the tape on the adhesive on the second side. Okay, so the reason, partly, I guess I should explain, the reason why I like to do that is as I pull the fabric up into that second side, I can give a gentle tug on the fabric. We don't want to tug it so much that we distort the pattern, but we also don't want any ripples or wrinkles on the front either. And here, now we're ready to do our short end. I did cut to the length, and you can see I have actually covered the fabric, and I'm ready to pull that back and fold up my fabric into the adhesive. Now I will say, just a little tip here, you have to make sure that the tape is really well stuck to the fabric. It can be kind of hard to pull at the corners. So grab that X-Acto blade to help you pick up a corner. And if that's really not working, what I do is I use that blade and I cut a little tiny slit in the middle where the tape is on the mat board, and then you can kind of peel the tape in either direction, and that works just well. So now I have pulled back the adhesive, and you can see with my fingers I'm kind of holding in that fabric, kind of like how the linen was after we laced the first round. And I want to do this because as we fold the fabric into the adhesive, I don't want any of the fabric to show beyond the edge of the mat board. So what I'm actually going to do here, I find it's helpful, I'm going to keep my fingers on the fabric, and instead of actually folding the fabric up into it, I'm actually going to pick up the mat board. My fingers will be holding the fabric onto my work surface, and I'm basically going to kind of just crease up the mat board and fold it down into the fabric. And here you can see what it's going to look like after I've put the fabric into the adhesive. And you can see, look at my nice crisp corners. I don't have any fabric peeking out of the edge. I just find, as I said, it's easier to, the fabric kind of stays where I need it to when I'm actually holding the fabric down, and then I'm pulling, kind of raising the mat board up and then folding it down into the fabric. And it's a little easier to explain when you're actually doing it. I think you'll kind of get the idea though. And like I said, that gives you just nice clean corners. And that's what your fabric covered board looks like when you've done both ends. Now, I always like to talk to students a little bit about picking their fabrics. I'll be perfectly honest. I designed the Autumn Folk, and then I went shopping for fabric. And this, I really was not thinking this fabric or even this color. So I always tell people, when you fabric shop for finishing, go kind of with an open mind. Like I said, this was a great print in that it was a little scatter print. It was small motifs. So you know, only seeing a 1/2 inch around, you're going to see a good bit of that pattern, and you're going to see little hints of the color coming through. I just sometimes, like I just tell people, you just have to kind of have an open mind when it comes to the fabric shopping for your finishes. And what I also found helpful was that I laced my linen and took it laced on its board as I was shopping for the fabric, just somehow laying the laced piece onto the fabric. It was easier to get the visual of what this was going to look like. And here's a close-up of my corners. So you get nice, clean corners. All right, now we are ready to add that extra layer of rickrack between the linen and the fabric covered mat board. So first suggestion is if you're, this is a hand-dyed rickrack from Lady Creates, and it does tend to come kind of wrinkly in the packaging. That's what happens during that lovely dyeing process to make it those awesome colors. So I'm definitely going to suggest that you press your rickrack. Then we have to decide how long we're going to cut our rickrack. I've done this in other videos before. If you look at my tutorial video for the season 2 finish, I walk you through how I attach the rickrack for that. My secret, and I've been doing this for years, is that when I have rickrack around something, I've actually attached it, and it's 4 separate sections. It's not one long piece of rickrack. I have yet to be able to perfect turning a corner and not ending up with some strange little glob at the corners that just doesn't really bug me a whole lot. So I create this with 4 separate pieces. So what I do when I trim my rickrack, I trim it in what I call the valley, right at the middle point, because we're gonna have, that's what's gonna get stuck into the adhesive once we peel that back. So you can kind of play around with this and figure out how many hills are going to be able to peek up outside the edge of your stitching. Now what this does mean, depending on just, how wide the rickrack is, how easily it moves, how long your piece is, you may get closer to the corners sometimes and not so close to the corners sometimes. Sometimes you're going to get, I call them naked corners. And personally for me, again, personal preference, I would really rather see kind of a naked corner than that weird, awkward turning the corner thing. I just myself haven't been able to perfect that. So once you figure out how big a piece of rickrack to cut for one side, just go ahead and cut your second one because we know they're the same measurement. You're also going to put 2 pieces of double-sided tape on either of the long sides, very close to the edge. The reason behind that is not so close that it's going over. We don't want to see any from the front, but we want to put it close to the edge because we're only going to be catching the bottom kind of dip or the valley of the rickrack into the tape to hold it in place. So that's why we want it close to the edge. All right, so here's a close-up of what all that looks like, and I have removed one of the paper backing on the side closest to me, so you can sort of see the shine in the picture a little bit. And this is why it's important to give your rickrack a trim, this next little, the way we're going to actually attach the rickrack. So what I do is I take my piece and I turn it over, and I kind of hover the stitching over the rickrack, make sure it's kind of centered where I want it, and then I just kind of let it touch down on the rickrack. I just tap the rickrack. I don't like hammer it into place just yet, but just enough so that it attaches, the rickrack attaches to the stitched piece, and now I can then sort of fiddle with it and adjust it a little bit. And if I find that, oh, I didn't get it quite centered, you know what? Peel the rickrack off and do it again. Do the same steps again. And this is what it looks like on the back side. So you'll see I'm probably about a ½ inch from the corner with all of this, and that's okay because it's going to be the same on all 4 corners. So it'll look pretty uniform. I'm going to have some pretty bare corners on this one. Again, I am okay with that look. So once you've tapped the rickrack into the exposed tape, then that's when you kind of want to make your little adjustments. Make sure it's evenly peeking out on the front side. I also tend to dip my corners down a little bit more because I don't want to see any of the cut sides poking out from the back of the linen. And then I attached the second side of the rickrack, and that's what we're looking like from the front. And then I went and did the exact same thing for either of my ends. So here's what that looks like. And again, yes, like I said, I've actually got fairly naked corners here, and I'm actually okay with that because I'd rather have just a nice clean look, and again, just a personal preference. But I just think the rickrack adds a lot sometimes. All right, here's what we're looking like. That's with the back with all 4 pieces of rickrack attached. And there's still a good bit of adhesive of the double-sided tape exposed from where I attached my rickrack. And that's okay, that's good. We're gonna be needing it in this next step. In the center, I've run 2 more long pieces of double-sided tape just so that we can have that in place so we can adhere it to our piece of fabric, our fabric covered mat board. Okay, peel that double-sided tape paper back and kind of hover over the fabric covered mat board and just sort of center it where I usually, honestly, I pretty much eyeball it. It's, you know, it's pretty easy to do. You can use, since we're working on a mat board with lines and measurements, you can kind of help, you know, use those lines to kind of help guide you, but I'm pretty sure you can mostly just eyeball it. And here's a closer look at what that's going to look like. Now, again, I want to talk about the fabric. I'll be honest with you, when I was going shopping for this, I was not thinking orange fabric. I didn't even know that that was a little acorn in there, but when I saw in the fabric, the backing fabric, but when I kind of really looked closer at it, there was something about it that just spoke to me. When I laid the stitched piece on top of it, I was like, it just worked. You just kind of know. It just kind of brightens the piece up, but it doesn't overpower it. And when I saw the little acorns in there and I had the little acorns in this piece, I just thought, this is it. I love it. And then the rickrack, I wanted it to complement. That I don't ever want my colors to kind of fight each other. I always want them to complement the stitching. So it's this to me is the fun part of just kind of letting the colors all blend and work together. All right, now we are ready to attach the board, the completed stitching section to the folk paddle that was designed and made by Chantal from Chantal's Design Studio. I use these magnets. They are about approximately 1/2 inch wide and 1/16 of an inch deep. I will put below where I get mine. And I love these because they come with a little adhesive back, so we don't have to wrestle with glue or putting any more double-sided tape behind them. You're literally just going to peel a tab back and stick them in place. So for this first season, I put the magnets where I wanted them to be on the back of my bottom piece. Now, 2 magnets were holding just fine, and in the class when we did the finishing, it was working. Now, I will say, when I took these to market, I noticed they were slipping a little bit. I don't know why. Just they were getting moved a lot. So I actually did add a 3rd magnet to the middle, and they weren't moving at all. So 2 or 3, I think you'll be fine either way. So I have actually peeled the back of my adhesive and stuck them onto my stitching. And yes, I left the back of my stitching just like that. I didn't lay it down. I didn't put any tape over. I mean, I didn't lay any tape over it or anything like that. I'm fine with it just like it is, and it's not going anywhere. Then what I did is I kind of held that the stitching section onto the board where kind of where I wanted it, centered on the folk paddle that Chantal made. And then I sort of let the magnets do the work, find each other. So I knew where my stitching was going to be placed, and then I let the magnet on the back find where the magnet was on the front, because they do stick through that board. It's not a very thick board. And then I peeled the backing, the adhesive off that magnet, and then I stuck it to the back of the board. So now when you do the other seasons, what'll happen, because your magnets on the back of the board will stay in place, you'll have to sort of do what I just mentioned, but in reverse. You're going to have to place the magnets on the back of your stitched portion according to where the magnets are already on your board. So just kind of reverse engineer that a little bit. It'll be a little more apparent when you go to finish your next seasons. All right, so here's the top handle of my board, and I just want to show you a little word about that, talk to you a little bit about that. I had visions of like ribbons and all kinds of things, but when it came down to it, to me, I felt like there was a lot going on. There was this lovely pattern that Chantal created for the board, which coordinates with each season. And then, of course, we have all the lovely embellished stitches and the rickrack and the fabric. So when it came right down to it, I felt like a simple finish on that long neck was warranted. So I really just got some long strands of jute and wrapped it around. I started at the bottom, wrapped up, and then I came back down to the bottom so that I could create this little knot. It would be a perfect spot to tuck in, say, some flowers or leaves, change it out seasonally, or leave just like this. And this board makes a great leaner, or you can hang it on a hook, something like that. All right, and here you go. That is the Spring Folk and the Four Seasons Folk finishing tutorial. I do have to tell you a little funny story. You'll look at the top of my Spring Folk piece and you'll see some green leaves there. When I taught the class as the Autumn Folk, I gave them these cute little wool felt leaves and we bunched them up and decorate as an option for what they could put in their jute wrap. And my original plan had been to do something like that for each season. And I guess when I went to go take the pictures and everything for this particular chart to get it ready for market, I didn't even notice that the green leaves were still there. So I've got the green fall leaves on the spring paddle. Well, kind of works. So I think there's so many different options. So there you go. That is your finishing tutorial for the Four Seasons Folk series. I hope you enjoyed it and happy stitching.